Lesson 31. Make sure your Bibles here are open to Genesis chapter 33. Okay? Some of you noticed there at the top you saw it said Genesis 33 and 35. There's another story in between there, but it is not pertinent to what we need to know and the big scope of things and the number of time. That's something else to be done. So it's Genesis 33 and 35. Brody? Oh, nope. I didn't. In fact, they're buried, it looks like. Anyways, make sure you have your maps out there too. Looks like you guys all have that. Your maps for lessons 31 through 33. Like I said, they're going to be helpful to knowing the places that Jacob is going here in today's story. So we left off yesterday. Jacob obviously left Laban sneakily. We saw their arguments. We saw their disagreements. And then we saw how they finally came together. They said Mizpah to one another. And we saw then Jacob the night before trying to get ready, and he separates his flocks and his herdsmen. He takes his wives and children on one side of the Jabbok River, and and leaves the others in the front in case Esau should come. And in his mind, obviously, was that the next morning he would be sending his two handmaids and their children across first, and then would come Leah and her children, and he would put Rachel way in the back with her children. Why put Rachel way in the back with her children? Colin? All right, if everybody died, he could care less, but let's take care of Rachel. So we can see that's a bad attitude to have. Okay, that's a poor attitude to have. So we'll see after a night of wrestling with God or with the angel, we'll see if Jacob's attitude has changed here. So we begin in lesson 31, right at the beginning of verse 33. Okay? And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau came, and with him 400 men. And he divided the children unto Leah and unto Rachel and unto the two handmaids, and he put the handmaids and their children foremost, and Leah and her children after, and Rachel and Joseph hindermost. And he passed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he had come near to his brother. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And he lifted up his eyes, so this is Esau, and saw the women and the children and said, Who are these with thee? And he said, The children which God hath graciously given thy servant. So Jacob is still calling himself thy servant. Then the handmaids came near, they and their children, and they bowed themselves. And Leah also with her children came near and bowed themselves. And after came Joseph near and Rachel, and they bowed themselves. So let's stop there. You can imagine, after a night of wrestling in the tent with that angel, Jacob gets up in the morning, and with a painful limp in his side, steps out of his tent. Okay? And as he steps out of his tent, the morning light is coming, or it's already come up, and there on the horizon he can see dust. And in front of the dust, men. It's Esau, his brother, coming. Probably with some of the men and gifts that he had sent before. And they're getting closer and closer. Jacob has a change here. Although we see him still lining them up in the order, he in his mind probably would have gone over the brook Jabbok the last. But God has taught him, God has humbled him in the night, so that Jacob knows the best thing to do is for himself to go over that river first. He needs to go meet his brother. He needs to trust God that God will preserve him and watch over him because God has made many promises to him. So he needs to go over the brook first. Okay? Jacob does that. He's changed here. He's at a point where we could say his faith is really high and his pride is very low. Okay? Or his dependence, his self-assurance, where he thinks he needs to control everything, is very low. So he goes across the brook. Okay? And we see that after he goes across the brook, he meets his brothers. We can imagine that limp We can also imagine Leah and Rachel probably wondering, what is it with my husband over there? Why is he limping like that? Moving so slowly and painful looking. They're probably themselves wondering. Or had he in the morning had breakfast with them at some point, maybe while they're coming in. We just don't know those facts. Okay? But we can see Jacob going over that brook limping. And he goes and he meets finally his brother. You can imagine the other hosts of the people standing around almost quietly, silently, wondering how this will be. Many of them had heard the stories. They all probably knew. Those of Jacob's group knew probably how he was fearful of his brother Esau and wondering what's going to happen. Is he going to thrust him through with a sword and we're going to have to turn and run for our lives? And those on Esau's side had probably heard the stories of the conniving that Jacob had done. And they're wondering on their side, will our master do something? And if he does, should we charge forward and attack them as well? What is going to happen here? So we can imagine them all almost in a quiet, hushed tone, seeing the two brothers probably alone by themselves out there, both walking towards each other. And what's going to happen when they come to each other? Everybody's wondering and probably quiet and looking out. Okay? And as they get closer, we see Esau ran to meet him. Why had Esau come with 400 men, do you think? Why did he come to meet his brother with 400 men? What was he probably thinking when he left Edom to come? Colin? Maybe he's thinking, I'm going to be attacked, so I need to have soldiers ready. Maybe he's still angry at his brother these 20 years later, and he wants to still attack his brother. We don't know. But we can say by taking that large of a group of men, he was coming to do something. More than likely attack his brother. But here, as he gets closer and closer, his attitude changes. Until finally, when it's just him and Jacob coming together, Esau runs to him, embraces his brother, kisses his neck, and they begin to cry. They wept together. What happened to Esau in between leaving Edom and hugging his brother? What happened in between there? I think we can look at it a couple of ways here, but Brody, what do you have as a guess? That's probably the best answer we could give. God worked in his heart. Just as Laban was coming angrily after Jacob, God specifically stopped Laban when he was sleeping and told him in that vision or in the dream, you will not harm my servant Jacob. God worked in Laban's heart. Same thing happens here. God probably works in the heart of Esau so that Esau knows, this is my brother. And although I meant to do him harm, I'm not going to do that. Another thing that we can all say is, every time we kind of get self-righteous, like we all sit at home and say, I'm going to tell my brother and sister this for what they did, or I'm going to tell mom and dad, or I'm going to talk back to them this way, and they'll hear and they'll learn it out. And then when we kind of get in front of the person, what kind of happens to our vigor that we've built up in ourselves that we think we're going to holler at them and tell them off, Amber? Yeah, sometimes we're a little bit more meek, and that's good. We have that, our conscience in us, so we have that in our minds and hearts. But here we can say, God is working. So that Esau runs to him, they weep. And then Esau, standing up, turning his brother around to look at, there's all of Jacob's host. He says, now who are these people? And they begin to come forward towards Esau. And Jacob first introduces the handmaids and all of those children. And then he introduces Leah and her children. And finally introduces Rachel and her child, Joseph. Okay? And he introduces them. And you can imagine Esau greeting the young children, maybe giving them hugs because he's their uncle. Okay? These are all his nephews and nieces. Oh, we read nephews, but there were children too. Girls too here. Nephews and nieces that are running up to him. And they're meeting their uncle for the first time. So there's probably some excitement there. And remember, the children of Leah, those firstborn, probably the first four sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, they're grown. They're probably young men, teenagers, or 20 years old. And they're meeting their uncle for the first time. Well, not 20 years old, but we can approximate maybe 13 years old. So they're teenagers. They begin to greet their uncle as well. And they're not all just little babes running around here. So we see those things. So now let's go on there. So that's a greeting. No death. Maybe the crowd that was with Jacob, they breathe a sigh of relief because they don't have to flee for their lives. Esau's group, we don't know. Maybe some of them were looking forward to a little battle and a little bit of trouble that they could get into. But in the end, they get to go back to their homes and their land as well, too. So they probably feel some relief from that standpoint, too. But let's read on here at verse 8. And this is Esau talking here. And what he said, what meanest thou by all this drove what I met? In other words, all these animals and these servants of yours that got sent ahead to me, what does this all mean? And he said, these are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. So Jacob said, well, I want to find grace in your sight. Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep that thou hast unto thyself. So he says, I don't need it. You can keep it. And Jacob said, nay, I pray thee, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my present at my hand. For therefore I have seen thy face, as though I have seen the face of God, and thou wast pleased with me. So we see here Jacob can even see in Esau's face here. Okay? He can even see that in your face. I can see God's friendliness. Jacob saw that God had changed Esau's hatred into friendliness. Please take it. So Esau does take it in the end. And he said, let us take our journey and let us go, and I will go before thee. So Esau says, all right. Now that we're together, let's turn around and go. I've got my 400 men plus men here. You've got all yours. Let's begin to march into Canaan. Because what do you think has happened to the men of Canaan, to the Canaanites, all the different tribes living there while Jacob's been gone for 20 years? What has happened to the people there? Probably a couple things we can say. Amber? Okay, there's more of them. So they're all over the place. What else? What else always grows with time, especially in the hearts of unbelievers? Wickedness. So there's probably more sin. It's probably not very safe to march straight through the land of Canaan, especially being a stranger, as Jacob would be considered marching through the land. They would be prime people to try to attack. Maybe steal 5 or 6 sheep here, or a few goats there, take a few people captive. It would be dangerous. So Esau says, let me guide your people through the land. And here's what Jacob says in response. And he said unto them in verse 13, my Lord knoweth that the children are tender, in other words, are young, and the flocks and herds with young are with me. So those who have young, little sheep or little goats or little cows. Okay, and if men should overdrive them one day, all the flock will die. So if we try to keep up with just your men, they'll be able to go quickly. We can't do that. They'll all die. Now, he's making excuses here, right? He's avoiding the real reason why he might not. But let's see what he says. Verse 14. Let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I will lead on softly, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure, until I come unto my Lord unto Seir. And Esau said, let me now leave with thee some of the folk that are with me. And he said, what needeth it? Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord. So Esau even says, well, just let me leave a few. And Jacob says, no, I don't need them. God is with me now. Okay? So Jacob is still at that high of faith here because he's trusting in God. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. Seir is another name for Edom. That's where the people of Esau live, the Edomites. Okay? So he goes back there, and Jacob journeying to Succoth. So you can find that on your maps there. He went from Succoth and built him there an house and made booths for his cattle. Therefore the name of the place is called Succoth. Okay? And Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, which is when he came from Padan Aram, and pitched his tent before the city. And he bought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he erected there an altar and called it El Ohi Israel. So let's take a look at this thing. He basically tells his brother thanks, but no thanks. But there's a main reason probably why Jacob, here at the height of his faith, knows that he should not be traveling with his brother Esau. What kind of man is Esau? From a spiritual standpoint. Kenton? He's an ungodly man. We have nothing to do with the wicked. Okay? We should not be living our lives with the wicked. Okay? We should be living a life of godliness with God's people. That's why sometimes you maybe have that with your parents, where the neighbors, next door neighbors, are totally ungodly people. They don't even go to any church. They don't have any faith in God. And mom and dad say, no, you don't need to go to the Brewers game with them if they invited you along or something. No, I don't want you going into their houses and playing with them. Who knows what they'll have on the television or the radio or the internet. Let's just, if you want to ride your bikes around outside with them or something, let's not be going in their houses and going off into every other place with them. Because they know that's a bad influence. Well, Jacob knows that here too, and he says to Esau, you know what? Now he made up some excuse. I can't go with you that fast. You just go ahead. Really, his answer would have been, brother, I hate to say this, I'm glad to see you again, but it appears to me you're still living in wickedness and sin. You must repent, brother, and live a life of godliness, and then we can live together. But it's easier just to kind of avoid the topic. Okay? And now we see Jacob's faith begin to go down and down and down. Because where does he build his home? Where does he build a house and make booths for his cattle? So probably like barns and pens. What city was that we had on your map there? Jaden? Succoth. Where does Jacob really need to go back to? What's the one place he needs to return to? Micah? Bethel. Now look at where Succoth is. Is it on the eastern side of the Jordan River or the western side of the Jordan River? Okay? It's just over that. But, so he goes over the river, but he avoids a few things there. Okay? He doesn't want to go down south into the plains of Mamre and the other places where his father still lives. Because what does he have to travel past to get to Mamre, if you look on your maps? What town does he have to travel past to get from Succoth to Mamre? Amber? Bethel. Okay? So what we begin to see here is that Jacob, for a time, does not want to travel. He would rather stay here. Why, we might wonder. Why would he not want to go, first of all, see his father? Why would he not want to travel and go back to Bethel and fulfill that promise now that he's at the height of his faith? Okay? But for whatever reason, he begins to come weaker. He begins to trust in God. So although he's promised to go back in Bethel and to give the Lord 1/10 of his wealth there, he's not in a hurry. Okay? Because he stays there in Succoth, and we see he even settled there by Shechem, a city. Okay? He bought a piece for his animals to graze there. Okay? There are probably some reasons. One, traveling through the land is dangerous. He did not trust God to watch over him. Two, he knew his sons were wicked. Okay? We see later on in the next couple stories how wicked his older sons, he had let them become. He had let them live. Okay? And because of that wickedness, they would not be good for them all to be traveling through that land of Canaan. So he stays here instead. He avoids having to go back to Bethel. So now he's there for some years, for some time. Again, we would think most of us would want to go see our father, but maybe he's afraid. Maybe he's a little bit embarrassed of the way he left his father. We don't know. But he does need to go back there, so that's where chapter 35 comes in. So look at chapter 35, verse 1. Okay? God said unto Jacob, Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there, and make thee an altar unto God that appeared unto thee when thou fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother. Then Jacob said unto his household, and to all that were with him, Put away the strange gods that are among you, and be clean, and change your garments, and let us arise and go up to Bethel. And I will make there an altar unto God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and was with me in the way which I went. And they gave unto Jacob all the strange gods which were in their hand, and all their earrings which were in their ears. And Jacob hid them under the oak, which was by Shechem. And they journeyed, and the terror of God was upon the cities that were round about them, and they did not pursue after the sons of Jacob. So a couple of things here. Finally, Jacob's not going to Bethel. So who comes to Jacob and tells him, you must go to Bethel? Who tells him he has to go here? Jennifer? God comes to him, tells him you need to go to Bethel. Okay? Now before he can go to Bethel, he's embarrassed to go there with some things. What things is Jacob embarrassed to take with him? Jaden? Yeah, the idols that his family members, Rachel, we know she stole her father's gods, and probably many of the other children in the family, they also have their own idols and gods, so they have to bury them. What kind of tree do they bury them under here, did it say, Logan? An oak tree. They bury them there so that now they can leave them behind, they leave their sins behind, and now they can come before God at Bethel. Now what is Jacob going to build there? What is he going to build there, Micah? Now we can go back, we can see that when he got to Succoth, he did build an altar there, or at Shechem, and he did give it a name, El-Ohi-Israel. You might say, well, again, Jacob was trying to, I hope this is good enough for God. I know I promised him Bethel, but this is, no, he needs to go to Bethel. So he needs to go there. And now one other thing happens. We said one reason that he was maybe afraid to go through the land was that, why? What was the reason he might be afraid to pass through that land? What's there in the land as he's traveling to Bethel? Brody? Wicked people who might attack, steal his animals, attack his children, his wives, they're beautiful, steal them. What does God do to all the people in the land of Canaan so that Jacob can travel through safely here? What does God do? That we just read in that last verse of verse 5. What does God do? Amber? Say that again? So how did he make the people of the cities feel about Jacob? Jen? What do you think? Scared. It's a good word to use to describe them. He's scared. They're scared. They are scared of Jacob and his people because God has put fear in their hearts. So they leave him alone. He can pass through safely. And then verse 6, so Jacob came to Luz, which is the land of Canaan, that is Bethel, he and all the people that were with him. And he built there an altar and called the place El Bethel, because there God appeared unto him when he fled from the face of his brother. And now we have some deaths here that we need to pay attention to. 3 deaths. But Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried beneath Bethel under an oak, and the name of it was called Elon Bechuth. This is someone who's taken care of Jacob since he was a baby. She has to be 100 and some years old. Okay? People assume that she's around 170 years old. And she is buried there. Okay, so that's one person that dies. Okay, and then if we skip ahead to verse 16, and they journeyed from Bethel, and there, so they made it to Bethel, and he did the things that he's supposed to do, and they journeyed from Bethel, so now he's heading to go see his father in Mamre, and there was but a little way to come to Ephrath, and Rachel travailed, in other words, she was pregnant. She went into labor, and she had a hard labor. So maybe the baby was coming out the wrong way, whatever. And it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said unto her, Fear not, thou shalt have this son also. And it came to pass, as her soul was departing, so as she was dying, that she called his name Benoni, okay, which we know, my son of my pain or my sorrow. This is my son and pain, and then she died. So she gives birth to a child. She probably has just a minute or so to hold him and calls him Benoni, which his father then calls Benjamin. And Rachel died and was buried in the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. So she's buried there. There we see Bethlehem. And Jacob set a pillar upon her grave. That is the pillar of Rachel's grave unto this day. Okay? That's important because later on when you study in church history, when you study the troubles with Bethlehem, because the Israelites, the Jews say there's something that's important there. The Christians say there's something important there, and the Muslims say there's important there. The Jews say this is the dying place of Rachel, Bethlehem. We need to keep this place holy. Church of Rachel there. But anyway, she dies. So now Joseph and Benjamin are without their mother. Okay, Jacob has lost the wife that we can say was his favorite. Okay. Verse 21, and Israel journeyed, so now they're not calling him Jacob, but calling him by the new name God has given him. Israel journeyed and spread his tent beyond the tower of Edar. And it came to pass when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine. So you see now his sons are living in sin, okay, with wicked wives of the land and other sins. And now verse 27, skip ahead to there. And Jacob came unto Isaac his father, unto Mamre, unto the city of Arba, which is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac sojourned. So Isaac is still alive here. And the days of Isaac were 180 years, and Isaac gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people, being old and full of days. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. So Isaac is still alive. Jacob can probably tell his father, his blind father, the stories. In fact, Isaac, we believe, is alive almost to the day, just soon before Jacob has to go down to Egypt to see Joseph. Okay? But anyways, Isaac is still alive. They spend a little bit of time together. And when he dies, it brings Esau and Jacob back together again. Together, these two brothers who once hated each other, now come together and they bury their father here. So when we pick up after our test here, we'll begin taking a look at the sons of Jacob, Joseph, and all those stories. Now, I want to go back to one thing. I think we covered most of the questions here. But the one thing that was more up to you guys, F there, what are idols in our life that we may have to bury as well? What are some idols in our lives? We're just like those sons. Before we judge Jacob too harshly and say, boy, what a guy who didn't have faith in God. What a guy who we have to judge our own selves to see that we're just like we saw in devotions. We have to say, just like Paul, I am the chief sinner. We shouldn't be looking too harshly at Jacob here. Kenton, what are some idols?
Money, sports.
Yep. Money. And here's something that's interesting. Sometimes we think of money like, we think of money as the rich guy, right? Don't serve God and mammon. But there's another person who can also be that person who serves money. And that's the person who their whole life they're consumed with money. They get home and they're counting their checkbook. And they're always on the computer checking, how are my funds doing? How's my money being made? They always want to know every nickel and dime. They can't even sleep at night sometimes because they're up at night thinking about where's this money going to come from, where's that going to come from, and they're constantly on their computer putting in things and numbers and everything else. And they spend their whole lives worshiping money. So that's one way, and obviously the other one is that we're always working. I got to work, I got to make more money, make more money, make more money. Okay, good. So I like that. It's a good example. It's another example of an idol in our lives. Okay, technology. We may be spending too much time with the technology on the computer. We always got to have the best or the newest, spending lots of money. Those are all things that every single one of us we got to be careful about. Brody. Okay, different sins, things that we're interested in. This is something that tempts me, so I know it's something I got to watch out for. Kenton. Hey, maybe we want to know what's this famous person doing. We worship them. We always want. I got to have their shirt and a poster of them, and I got to know everything about them and always learning. Okay, we can make lots of things into idols. Okay? Spend all my money and my time on hunting. Spend all my days instead of getting my homework done tonight. I'll just read my book for 4 hours every night instead of doing that. Okay, sports can become an idol. All focused on. We won't have devotions tonight because boy, we got to get off to the basketball game or whatever it may be. Or we'll skip devotions because of this. There's so many things that the devil knows he can tempt us with. So before we judge Jacob and his family too harshly, going, boy, idols, I can't believe I know. Mom and Dad would never allow us to have some wooden idols. Well, it's easy to throw those away, burn them up, destroy them. It's a little bit harder to put things out of our lives like sports or books or hunting or money. Those things we might say actually might be easier if we actually had a wooden idol to worship. Can easily put that away. So